Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
Dear listeners, before we get started, drop a quick hi in the comments and let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you have any suggestions for us to make the channel better, please let us know. Now let's start with the story. My name is Matthew Grant. I'm 34, a tech engineer by trade, living alone in a compact apartment in Denver. From my window, I can see the snow-capped shoulders of the Rocky Mountains, reminding me every day of why I came here in the first place. I once thought I'd found peace in this place, a kind of stillness. But some wounds never really heal, and some phone calls have the power to rip you right back into the past you thought you'd buried for good. That night, I stood at the door of my apartment, phone in hand. The screen glowed in the dimness, displaying a simple text message from my mother. "I'm sick, Matthew, can you come home?" 10 words, no more, but they cut straight through me, slicing apart the walls I'd built between myself and the Grant name over these past 2 years. I looked out through the glass at the faint silhouette of the mountains against the fading twilight. Denver had been my sanctuary, the place where I'd tried to rediscover myself after leaving my father's company. But I knew I had to go back. Not for my father, never for him, but for my mother, the only one who'd never called me a traitor, even after I left. I moved around my apartment, pulling open drawers, stuffing a few clothes into my old backpack. I paused for a moment, glancing back. The place was simple, clean, spare. A handful of tech books on the table, a guitar resting in the corner that I hardly ever touched. It was my world, a world free from the drama, the poisonous whispers of money and power that clung to the family name like a curse. But the past has a way of finding you, no matter how far you run. Like a predator hunting wounded prey. The drive from Denver to Boulder shouldn't take more than an hour, but every mile felt like a lifetime. I flicked on the radio, letting an old country station fill the silence, trying to calm my nerves, but it was useless. Memories surged, unstoppable. My father, Warren Grant, 63 years old, a tall man with a voice that could fill a room, the way thunder fills a summer sky. He was the head of a mineral mining company, a small empire he'd built out of nothing. And to him, that company was more than a business. It was his legacy, his very reason for being. And me? I was supposed to be the heir, the right-hand man, the eldest son carrying on the Grant legacy. It all fell apart 4 years ago. I remember the moment so clearly. I'd been deep into data systems, routine audits, or so I thought. But what I found was anything but routine. The company wasn't just mining stone and ore. It was mining greed. They'd torn up forests, polluted entire rivers near their sites. And worse, they were evading taxes, their accounting twisted into lies. I couldn't stay silent. One night, I went to my father's office. He was reviewing shipment ledgers, the lamplight casting sharp shadows on his face. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. "Dad," I started, voice raw. "I found something. About the accounts and the river. The runoff is destroying everything downstream. We can do better, Dad. We don't have to destroy everything to make money." He looked up slowly, fixing me with those eyes that once made me feel safe. But they were cold now, hard as steel. "What do you think you know about this world, Matthew?" he asked, his tone low and deadly calm. "Do you think businesses survive on ethics? Do you think you can save the world with good intentions?" For the first time, I saw him clearly. Not as the hero I'd admired all my life, but as a man devoured by ambition, no longer able to tell right from wrong. I stood there in the silence, every illusion falling away. There was nothing more to say, so I left. No shouting, no accusations. I just quietly cleared my desk and disappeared. My father called it betrayal. He never forgave me for walking away. And truthfully, I never looked for his forgiveness. Travis, my younger brother, was 27 back then. Brilliant, focused, and determined to carve a place for himself in our father's world. He stayed, took over the finances. While I walked away, he stayed rooted, believing that loyalty was the same as duty. He never understood. "You're ruining your life," he told me the last time we saw each other. He looked at me like I was the one who'd lost his way. I didn't respond. Because some things can't be explained, not when your heart already knows what's right, but the words fall apart before they can carry that truth to anyone else. As I drove into Boulder, the sun had begun to slip behind the trees. The streets were familiar, each turn etched into memory. Wooden houses stood nestled among the tall pines, their windows glowing with the quiet of early evening. And then there it was, the Grant home. 2 stories of stone and wood, ivy curling up one side of the porch. A sprawling garden out front, wild now, but still holding the shape of my childhood. I could almost see my younger self darting between the hedges, laughing, scraping knees. The garage door was open. My father stood there in a checkered shirt, sleeves rolled, holding a wrench as he leaned over the engine of an old truck. The same one he used to let me ride in when I was 5. He looked up when he heard the car. His eyes met mine. No smile. No nod. Just silence. A silence that said more than words ever could. "Matthew," he said at last. His voice was low, even, devoid of emotion. I stepped out of the car and shut the door behind me. "I'm back," I said, holding his gaze. "For Mom." He gave a small, grim nod, then gestured toward the house. "The doctor says she needs rest. Cancer. Stage 2. But she's tough. You know that." I nodded. "Yeah, I know." Then I walked past him, brushing close enough to smell the old scent of motor oil and sweat that always clung to him. It felt like pushing through stone, cold, solid, immovable. Inside, the faint smell of disinfectant hung in the air. It hit me immediately, blending with something else. Chamomile, maybe. My mother lay on the couch in the living room, thin and pale. Too thin. Her skin looked fragile, stretched. But her hair was still neatly tied back, and her eyes, God, her eyes, still sparkled like they used to. "Matthew, my boy." Her voice was soft, but it carried across the room like a hymn. She reached for me, and I knelt beside her, taking her hand. It was cold, but her grip had strength. As if she was trying to hold me there, ground me in that moment. "I'm sorry I didn't come back sooner," I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Don't apologize," she whispered, squeezing my hand. "I just wanted to see you. And Travis too. Our family needs to be together." I nodded, though I knew too well that family wasn't a simple word anymore. Not in this house. That evening, Travis arrived with his wife and their son, Eric, 5 years old and beaming with unfiltered joy. Travis looked older than I remembered. A few strands of gray now ran through his hair, and the lines around his eyes had deepened. But his smile was still warm, still honest. "It's been a while, big brother," he said, pulling me into a quick hug. It was awkward, brief, but real. Before I could respond, Eric ran straight at me and threw his arms around my leg. "Uncle Matt," he shouted, his small voice full of excitement. I laughed and picked him up. The tension I'd carried with me from Denver melted just a little in that moment. He wrapped his arms around my neck and didn't let go. But then I looked over Eric's shoulder and saw my father, seated at the head of the long, oak dining table, watching, waiting. And I knew this meal wouldn't be easy. Dinner was tense. My mother, trying to lift the weight in the room, brought up old stories, childhood memories, family camping trips, that time I got lost in the woods and Travis cried until we were both found. She smiled as she spoke, but I could hear the effort behind it. My father sat in silence. He chewed mechanically, eyes occasionally flicking toward me, as if he wanted to say something, or maybe was daring me to. Travis talked more than usual, his voice quick, upbeat, filling the air like patchwork to keep it from tearing apart. "The company's expanding," he said eagerly, reaching for another helping of mashed potatoes. "We just signed a big deal with a partner in Nevada. Dad thinks this could be our breakthrough year." I nodded but said nothing. I didn't want to dredge up the past. I didn't come back to start another war. My only goal was to be there for my mother, to give her peace, not more pain. But then my father spoke. His voice cut across the table like ice. "Are you going to ask about the company, Matthew?" he said, not even looking at me directly. "Or are you still too busy with your Save the World projects?" The table froze. Silence swelled like a tide. My mother turned her head toward me, eyes pleading, almost begging me not to respond. Travis stopped chewing. His fork hovered in midair, as if suspended by the tension in the air. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. My chest tightened, but I kept my voice even. "I'm doing my work, Dad," I said quietly. "I have no intention of interfering with yours." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "Of course. You're good at running away. You think you're noble for leaving, but you're just an ungrateful kid." "Warren," my mother said softly, but there was iron behind it. "That's enough." I stood up, pushing the chair back gently. I didn't look at him. "Excuse me," I said to my mother. "I'll be outside for a while." She gave me a faint nod, her lips pressed together, trying to hold the family together with nothing but hope and thin threads of love. I walked away without looking back, but I could feel it, his eyes burning into my back like coals. I knew he'd never forgiven me, and if I was being honest, maybe I'd never forgiven him either. That night, I stayed in my old room. Nothing had changed, not really. The same posters still clung to the walls, a little faded now. A bookshelf half filled with tech manuals and childhood fantasy novels. A few framed photos, Travis, Mom, and me, all smiles on some beach trip from years ago. It felt like walking into a memory that no longer belonged to me. But sleep never came. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my mind churning. I thought of Mom, how much she'd sacrificed, how she'd endured everything to keep us together. I thought of Travis, and how he stayed. He had to know about some of it. He was the financial manager. He must have seen what I saw, yet he still chose to remain. And I thought of my father, the man I once worshipped. Now just a shadow of that image, consumed by ambition, unreachable. The next morning, I got up early. I didn't want another confrontation. I didn't want to sit at that table again and see the tension crack my mother's face. So I decided to clean the garage. Something simple, something helpful, something that would make her smile. The garage hadn't changed either. Dust hung in the air like time itself had settled. Old tools, boxes stacked in the corners. Half-finished projects from the days when my father still worked with his hands instead of just signing checks. As I cleared space behind a stack of tires, something caught my eye. A metal box, scuffed and partially buried under old rags and rusted tools. It took effort to pull it free. The latch was stiff, and my fingers hesitated. But curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a hard drive. An old one. Heavy. Industrial. The kind the company used for backup data storage. There was a sticker on it, faded but legible. The company logo, and beneath it, written by hand. Accounting 2018 to 2020. My heart skipped. I knew I shouldn't. I knew this wasn't mine to look at. But my hands moved before my mind could catch up. I took the drive upstairs to my room and plugged it into my laptop. What loaded made my blood run cold. Folder after folder. Financial records, internal communications, export logs. And then, emails. Dozens. Hundreds. I opened one. Then another. My eyes scanned faster and faster, my pulse pounding in my ears. Bribes to local officials. Falsified reports to manipulate tax audits. And then I saw it. An internal message chain from 6 years ago, tagged urgent. It detailed a mining accident. A worker had died. But instead of reporting it, the company paid the family quietly, covered it up, suppressed the incident. I sat there, staring at the screen, unable to move. It felt like the world had shifted under my feet, like I was sliding into something dark I couldn't climb out of. I copied everything onto a USB. My hands trembled the whole time. I didn't want a scene. I didn't want to destroy what little piece my mother had left. But I knew then that things had changed. For good. When I returned the hard drive to the box, I didn't put it back exactly as I found it. I left it just slightly out of place, just enough for my father to know someone had touched it. I wanted him to know. I wanted him to feel the pressure just like I felt it, gnawing at me, crushing me from the inside out. The next morning, I woke up with a heaviness in my chest, like a stone pressing down on my lungs. I walked into the living room to find my mother still lying on the couch, frail, smaller than I remembered. But when she saw me coming in with a cup of coffee, she managed to smile. "Did you sleep well, my boy?" she asked, her voice soft and tired. I lied. "Yeah, Mom. I slept okay." But the way she looked at me, that deep, knowing way, I knew she didn't believe a word of it. She'd always seen right through me, even as a kid sneaking out past curfew. I sat down beside her, talking about my life in Denver, the technical projects I'd been involved with, a software optimization I'd led last year. I tried to sound enthusiastic, to distract both of us from the sickness and the tension clawing at this house. But my mind kept drifting back to the hard drive, to those emails, to the worker who'd died and been hidden under hush money. And my father. Always my father. I heard him before I saw him, heavy footsteps on the wooden floor. He appeared in the doorway, wearing a crisp shirt, hair neatly combed as if nothing in the world could touch him. But there was something different in his eyes. It wasn't just anger. It was a coldness, a calculation, like a chess master about to sacrifice a piece. "Matthew," he said, his voice perfectly even. "Come take a walk with me." I hesitated. Everything in me wanted to refuse, to stay beside my mother, where it was safe. But then I saw her looking up at us, that thin hope in her eyes, hope that maybe, just maybe, we could be father and son again. So I nodded. We stepped outside into the backyard. Tall pines cast long shadows over the patchy grass, their needles stirring with the faint breeze. The morning air should have felt fresh, but I felt like I was breathing through a wet cloth, suffocated by the truth that hung between us. My father walked ahead, hands buried in his pockets, each step slow, measured, as if he was assembling the right words one by one. Finally, he spoke without turning around. "What did you find in the garage yesterday?" My heart kicked hard against my ribs. He knew. He must have seen the hard drive out of place. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice even. "Just cleaning up, Dad. The garage was a mess." He stopped and turned to face me, and the sharpness in his eyes made me flinch. "Don't play smart with me, Matthew," he snapped. "You think I don't know you've been rummaging through things?" I paused, holding his gaze. He was probing, trying to corner me, but I wasn't going to let him do that. "If you're worried about what I found," I said, steady but cold, "why don't you just say it?" A humorless, dry laugh escaped him. "You always think you're right, don't you? You think you can dig up the past and stand there judging me." His face tightened, his jaw flexing. "But you don't understand, Matthew. The world doesn't work the way you want it to." I felt the anger rise in my throat, hot and unstoppable. Does your world work by covering up someone's death? I blurted, the words like a bullet tearing through the thin layer of civility. He froze for a fraction of a second, his face shifting into something dark and dangerous. Then he stepped closer, voice dropping low enough that only I could hear. You don't know what you're getting yourself into, son, he hissed. If you're smart, you'll forget what you saw. For the sake of all of us. He let that hang in the air, then turned and walked away without another word. I stood there, my feet glued to the ground, the morning chill wrapping around me. But I felt no relief, only a crushing weight on my chest. His words weren't just a warning. They were a threat. As the wind rustled through the pine trees, carrying the damp scent of needles and earth, I felt like the whole world was pressing in on me, closing off every exit. I knew, right then, I couldn't stay here much longer. It wasn't safe. Not now, when my father had sensed that I knew too much. I returned to Denver the next morning, the winding roads blurring beneath the wheels of my car while my mind churned. It felt like I was leaving one battlefield only to step into another, carrying a secret that could shatter everything. When I stepped back into my apartment, everything was exactly as I'd left it, small, neat, the same thin morning light pouring through the window. It fell across the bookshelf, picking out a fine layer of dust I'd been too distracted to notice before. I dropped my backpack near the couch and went straight to check the USB, hidden in a narrow compartment in my desk. The tiny drive felt heavier than it had any right to be. Inside, the documents were like a live grenade, and I knew one wrong move could set it off, tearing through my life and taking my family down with it. I sat at the table, opened my laptop, and tried to drown myself in work. A software patch for a Denver startup, a simple routine project, normally the kind of task I could lose myself in. But my mind refused to cooperate. Every line of code blurred with images from Boulder, my father's cold, calculating stare, the veiled threat in his voice, and my mother, her frail body on the couch, still trying to hold us all together even as her own strength slipped away. I couldn't stand it anymore. I picked up my phone and dialed Derek, my old friend and a prosecutor I trusted. When he answered, I hesitated for a moment before saying, I have something, Derek. Something sensitive. I can't go into details yet, but I need your advice. He was silent for a beat. Then his voice came through, steady but worried. What are you getting yourself into, Matt? Nothing good. I admitted, my voice cracking just slightly. If this is big, you need to protect yourself, Derek said, his tone shifting into a practiced calm I'd heard before when he handled tough cases. Send me a copy of the data. Let me take a look. I closed my eyes. Sending him the data would mean no turning back. It would mean a guaranteed investigation. My father, the company, everything would burn. And Mom. I didn't know if she could survive watching her world collapse. Okay, I finally said, voice low. I'll think about it. I'll send it to you soon. Don't wait too long, Derek warned. Be careful. I ended the call but couldn't shake the unease. For the next few days, I tried to live like nothing had happened. Work, meetings, a quick coffee run, a few late-night coding sprints, the ordinary routine. But the fear never left. I started noticing things. A black truck parked near my street, idling far longer than it should have. A phone call where no one spoke, only breathing on the line before a click. And the creeping, prickling sense that eyes were on me every time I stepped outside. I tried to tell myself it was paranoia. Maybe I was seeing ghosts. But after that conversation with my father, I couldn't be sure of anything anymore. What was real? What was just fear? My 34th birthday was approaching. I hadn't planned anything. A quiet night alone, a simple dinner and a glass of wine, maybe an old movie on Netflix. That was celebration enough for me. Then my phone rang again. It was my mother. Even through the connection, her voice was weak but full of worry. Matthew, my boy, she began, trembling just a little. I know you like being on your own, but a birthday should be spent with family. Her words ached in my chest. She continued, I worry about you, all alone in Denver. It must be lonely. Invite Travis and his family over, okay? I want you to be happy on your special day. I wanted to tell her it was fine, that solitude was something I'd grown used to, even learned to love. But hearing her voice, every word a plea not to let us drift further apart, I couldn't say no. I took a deep breath, nodded even though she couldn't see me, and forced a smile she couldn't hear. Okay, Mom, I'll have them over. After we hung up, I picked up my phone again and called Travis. His place was about a half hour from mine, and I knew he'd never pass up a chance to pull me back toward the family orbit. Your birthday, huh? Travis said with an easy laugh. Count us in. I'll bring Samantha and Eric. He sounded genuinely excited. Eric's been dying to see Uncle Matt. I smiled over the phone when Travis said Eric was excited, but inside, a weight still sat on my chest. Travis was my father's man now, his right hand, the loyal son who never left. I couldn't help wondering if he was watching me for Dad, whether they had some quiet arrangement to keep tabs on the wayward son. The day of my birthday came. A clear Saturday, bright sunlight flooding through the window, catching the dust on the floorboards and making it shine like gold. I tried to tell myself it was going to be a good day. I went through the motions. Straightened the stack of technical books, wiped down the counters, scrubbed a few coffee rings off the table. I even went out and bought some balloons, mostly for Eric. I couldn't disappoint him. When they arrived that afternoon, the tension eased for just a moment. Travis's grin was wide, Samantha's smile genuine, and Eric barreled straight into my legs like a tiny missile. "Uncle Matt, I brought cookies for you," he shouted, proudly holding up a crumpled paper bag. I laughed and scooped him up, feeling something warm spark in my chest. "Cookies? You're the best, buddy," I told him, giving him a gentle squeeze. Travis clapped me on the shoulder, that same easy brother pat we'd shared since we were kids. "Happy birthday, man," he said. Samantha leaned in to give me a hug, adding, "I brought your mom's casserole recipe. She insisted I make it." Hearing that made my heart twist, but I nodded. "Thanks. She'll be glad you remembered." We settled around my small kitchen table. For a while, things almost felt normal. Travis started telling stories, the same old ones, about how we'd driven Mom insane lighting backyard fireworks, about the time I convinced him to jump off the shed into a kiddie pool. Eric giggled, cheeks stuffed with cookie crumbs, eyes wide with wonder at the idea of us being kids once. I tried to let myself laugh, to loosen up, but every time my mind flickered to Dad, to Boulder, to those files on the USB, a chill crawled down my spine. Even though he wasn't there, I could almost feel him, pulling strings, watching from afar. Around 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone else. I thought it might be a neighbor or a friend, but when I opened the door, there was a delivery guy standing there holding a big silver-wrapped box. "For Matthew Grant," he said, handing me a clipboard to sign. I took the package, thanked him, and set it on the table. Travis and Samantha leaned in, curious. "What is it?" Travis asked. I peeled off the silver paper and lifted the lid. A chocolate cake, perfectly frosted, with delicate sugar flowers in red and white. Beautiful, too beautiful. A small card was tucked inside. "Happy birthday, Matthew." No name, just those words. But the handwriting, something about it looked familiar, a ghost of memory from my father's business circles, maybe one of his old associates. A cold unease rose in my chest, but I forced a smile so no one else would see it. "Wow, that's gorgeous," Samantha said, leaning closer to admire it. "Who sent it, Matt?" I swallowed, trying to keep my voice level. "Probably an old friend," I lied. "Not sure exactly." Eric was practically bouncing in his seat, eyes wide. "Can we cut it, Uncle Matt? Please." I forced another smile. "Of course, buddy." But deep down, something felt wrong. I wasn't even hungry, and the idea of eating that cake twisted my stomach into knots. "You guys go ahead," I said, nudging the box toward them. "I'm trying to cut back on sweets." Travis laughed, giving me a playful shove on the shoulder. "You're such an aesthetic, Matt," he teased. Then he dug the knife in and served a big slice for Eric, who attacked it with both hands, frosting spreading across his cheeks like war paint. Samantha politely declined. "I'm not big on chocolate," she said, so Travis had a slice too, telling me I was missing out on the best part of my own party. I sat there, pretending to sip water, trying to look relaxed. But my eyes kept drifting back to the cake, the handwritten card, the too perfect icing. Every bite they took made something crawl down my spine. The evening carried on. Eric's laughter filled the apartment, bright and innocent, while Travis went on about how he'd started teaching Eric how to fish last summer. Samantha shared stories about how she'd first learned to make cornbread from my mother. It should have felt comforting, familiar, but it didn't. When they left, I hugged Eric a little too tightly, promising him I'd visit soon. Travis clapped me on the shoulder, smiling in that easy way of his. "It's been a while since we had this much fun, Matthew. Thanks for inviting us." I nodded, smiled back, but as I shut the door behind them, I felt like I'd just stepped through an invisible trap. The next morning, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number at first, but when I answered, it was my father. He almost never called me, and that day, something was different. His voice was soft, unsettlingly soft, almost intimate, the kind of tone he used when I was a kid and he wanted something. "Did you have a good birthday, son?" The gentleness sent a chill through me. I hesitated. "It was nice, Dad. I invited Travis's family over, so it was lively." There was a sharp pause. Then his voice snapped back, hard and cold, like a whip. "What did you just say?" I blinked. Travis's whole family was there. "Yeah, Mom said I should invite them, to make it feel more like." Click. The line went dead. I pulled the phone from my ear and stared at the screen, confused. My heartbeat thudded in my chest. What the hell was that? Then my eyes slowly drifted toward the kitchen counter. The leftover cake still sat there, its perfect icing now dulled in the morning light. And suddenly a thought, a sickening, impossible thought, flashed through my mind. No, no, it couldn't be. My father wouldn't. Would he? But I remembered his eyes in the backyard. His threat. The flat tone in his voice when he said I didn't understand how the world worked. I knew, deep down, I knew, he was capable of anything. 30 minutes later, my phone rang again. It was Samantha. Her voice came through the speaker trembling, almost incoherent. Eric and Travis, they're sick. They're in the hospital. Can you come right away? My heart froze. What? What's wrong? What happened? She sobbed. I could barely make out the words. I don't know. After Travis spoke to someone, he got scared. He rushed Eric to the hospital. The doctors say it's poisoning. Acute liver failure. There was a pause. Her voice cracked. Eric, he's critical. Matthew, Travis is in a coma. Please come now. I didn't even respond. I just moved. I bolted from the apartment, keys in hand, my legs numb, thoughts scattered. My car peeled out of the parking lot, tires shrieking. The drive to Boulder blurred into a gray tunnel of noise and dread. Poisoning. Travis and Eric. The cake. My father. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to let the thought finish forming in my mind. But it was already there, buried deep in my gut like ice. When I arrived at the hospital, I found Samantha in the hallway, standing alone, clutching Eric's small blue jacket like it was the only thing keeping her upright. They started vomiting this morning, she whispered when I approached. The doctors say Eric and Travis are in critical condition. I'm so scared, Matthew. I reached out, took her hand. It was trembling. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words tangled in my throat and never came out. I asked to see the doctor. He came out quickly, serious-faced, and spoke in clipped, clinical terms. Both patients are showing signs of severe poisoning, he said. A potent toxin affecting the liver. We're running further tests, but their condition is very serious. His words were knives. I felt every syllable. When he left, I looked back at Samantha. Her face was pale, her eyes red, and behind her trembling lips was a woman doing everything she could not to fall apart. I wanted to be strong for her, to offer something solid to lean on, but my mind wouldn't stop spinning. The cake. My father's voice. The call. The silence. I sat in the hallway, head bowed, trying to piece it all together. And then I saw him. At the far end of the corridor. Warren Grant. My father. He walked in like he owned the place. Gray suit sharp as ever, hair perfectly combed, not a wrinkle out of place. But his eyes, they were alert in a way I hadn't seen before. Like he was calculating every second, every movement. He approached Samantha first, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. I couldn't hear what he whispered, but she nodded, tears still streaming silently down her face. Then she stepped aside, wiping her eyes, leaving us, just me and him, standing face to face in the cold, fluorescent-lit hallway. Matthew, he said, his voice smooth, as icy as ever. Are you okay? I stared at him, a fire rising in my chest that I could barely control. Okay, I said, my voice cracking with fury. How could I be okay when Travis is in a coma and Eric, a 5-year-old boy, is fighting for his life? I stood, stepping toward him. The hallway around us seemed to shrink until there was only him and me, eye to eye. You know what's going on, don't you? I asked, my voice low and trembling with restrained rage. I didn't want Samantha to hear, not now. The cake. Your call this morning. What do you know about this? For the briefest moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Surprise? Maybe. But then it vanished, buried under that same familiar mask of cold composure. What are you talking about, Matthew? He said with practiced calm. You think I had something to do with Travis and Eric getting sick? You're out of your mind. Don't play dumb. I snapped, stepping in closer. His cologne, that same sharp cedar scent from my childhood, hit me like a wave, now mixed with something rotten. That cake was sent to my house with a card from an old friend. You remember that, don't you? No name, just enough to make me curious. And now they're in there, poisoned. You think I'm just going to believe that's a coincidence? His jaw clenched, but he didn't back away. You're accusing your own father without evidence, he said, the warmth stripped clean from his voice. You think I'm a monster who'd harm my own son and grandson? Do you really think I'm that evil? His words hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to say no. God, I wanted to believe he couldn't. That despite everything, the corruption, the cold ambition, the threats, he'd draw the line at this. But then I remembered the hard drive, the bribes, the cover-up, the accident they buried, and his words in the backyard, quiet and razor-sharp. You don't know what you're getting yourself into. I remembered the way he paused during the call this morning when I mentioned Travis and Eric. The shift in his voice. The silence. It wasn't a coincidence. You told me to forget what I found. I said, my tone controlled but cutting. You said it was for the good of all of us. But whose good, Dad? Yours? The company's? Or the secrets you're trying so hard to hide? He shook his head, lips tight, his eyes cold as glass. You don't know what you're talking about. You're letting paranoia eat you alive. I'm here because I'm worried about Travis and Eric, not to listen to your baseless accusations. I wanted to shout. I wanted to shove him against the wall and force the truth out of him. But I knew it wouldn't work. This wasn't a man who confessed. This was a man who buried the truth deep enough that even guilt couldn't reach it. And with Samantha just down the hall, holding her breath in despair, and my mother at home, too weak to stand, I couldn't afford to lose control. I took a deep breath, met his gaze and held it. I'll find the truth, I said, voice low and steady. And if you're involved in this, I swear I won't let you get away with it. He didn't blink, didn't flinch. He just stared at me for a long, silent moment, eyes blank, face carved from stone. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, heading down the hall toward Travis's room, like nothing had happened. I stood there, heart pounding, fists clenched, every breath thick with anger and helplessness. I couldn't stay, not with the sterile air, the faint scent of antiseptic and fear, and his presence like a stain on the walls. I left the hospital without another word. The drive back to Denver was a blur, my hands tight on the wheel, the road rushing past like time itself wanted to escape what was happening. I didn't know what I believed anymore. Part of me still wanted to think my father wasn't capable of such horror. But the signs were there, every one of them pointing to him. The cake, the card, his tone on the phone, and worst of all, the fact that I, not Travis, might have been the intended target back at my apartment. I checked what was left of the birthday cake. It sat there in its silver box on the kitchen counter, some of the frosting melting under the faint warmth of the afternoon sun. It looked innocent, harmless, but the sight of it made my skin crawl. I didn't dare touch it with my bare hands. I found a large Ziploc bag in the drawer, carefully lifted the cake with a spatula, and sealed it tight. The card with its cryptic from an old friend, signature still gave me chills, so I slipped that in too. I called Gavin, an old friend from my university days who now worked as a lab technician in a small Denver facility. I need you to test something for me, I said, trying to steady my voice. Gavin could hear it instantly. Matt, you sound shaken. What kind of test? I closed my eyes for a second, forced myself to say it. I suspect it's poisoned. I need you to run a full tox screen, as fast as you can. There was a long pause on the line. Bring it over now, Gavin finally said, no hesitation. I'll prioritize it. Just be careful. I drove to the lab with my heart pounding against my ribs. When I handed over the sealed bag, Gavin took it gingerly, frowning as he glanced at me. You okay? He asked quietly. How serious is this, Matt? Very serious, I answered. I couldn't explain, not yet. The words were too heavy, too dangerous. Just test it, Gavin. Please. He nodded, eyes narrowed with worry. I'll call you the second I have anything. 3 days later, Gavin called. I was in my apartment, staring at the USB drive on the table, the documents from my father's company like a sleeping bomb in my hands, when the phone rang. Matt, sit down, Gavin said. His voice trembled. My stomach dropped. What did you find? He blew out a shaky breath. I tested the cake. There's poison in it, a mannan. It's a highly toxic compound from certain mushrooms. Odorless, tasteless, almost impossible to detect. It attacks the liver, causes acute liver failure. My throat went dry. How much was in there? The dose, Gavin said, swallowing hard, was enough to kill. My blood went ice cold. A mannan. I wasn't a chemist, but I'd heard of it. Rare, potent, absolutely not something you'd ever find by accident in a cake. Someone had put it there on purpose. And deep down I knew. That cake was meant for me. If I hadn't been avoiding sweets, if I hadn't pushed it toward Travis and Eric, I'd be the one lying in a hospital bed, or worse. I closed my eyes, the image of Eric giggling with chocolate smeared on his face crashing into me, and Travis teasing me about my diet. My hands started to shake. Thanks, Gavin. I managed to say, my voice dry as paper. Send me the full report, okay? Yeah, of course, Gavin replied, worry still thick in his voice. Matt, be careful. I will, I said, though I barely believed it myself, and hung up. I slumped into my chair, burying my face in my hands. The weight of it, everything, pressed down on me until I thought I might break. My father, could he really have gone this far? Tried to kill me, his own son? The hard drive, the documents, the cover-up, the cake. Yes, he could. I couldn't let him bury this. Not this time. My hands steadied with a cold, final resolve. I plugged the USB into my laptop, pulled up the folder, and gathered every file. The hidden accounts, the emails about bribes, the report on the fatal mining accident. Then I added Gavin's lab report on the poison. Everything. I compressed it into a single encrypted archive and attached it to an email address to Derek, my friend in the prosecutor's office. Derek, this is everything I have. Documents from my father's company, and the lab report on the poison in the birthday cake. My brother and nephew are in the hospital because of it. I trust you'll know what to do. Thank you. I hovered a second over the send button, then clicked it. A weight lifted off me, but another, heavier, colder, settled on my shoulders. I had just put my father squarely in the crosshairs of the law. His empire could collapse. My mother, what would she do when she found out? When she learned what her husband truly was? I couldn't stop. Not after what he'd done. Not with Travis and Eric fighting for their lives. I slipped the USB into a locked drawer, key turned tight, and sat down. Outside the window, the Rocky Mountains loomed in the twilight, jagged against the fading sky. But this time, they brought no sense of peace. I thought of my mother, how she spent her life trying to hold our family together, even as her own strength slipped away day by day. I thought of Travis, my stubborn, warm-hearted brother. He'd always fought hard for what he believed in, even if we stood on opposite sides. Now he lay motionless in a hospital bed, his strong voice silenced, his body still. And Eric, that radiant little boy with the wild laugh and sticky fingers, now had machines breathing for him. I clenched my fists, nails biting into my palms until the pain forced me to stop. I couldn't fix any of it, but I could trust Eric. He knew the law. He knew how to dig deep, how to make power answer for its sins. And I knew, in my bones, that he wouldn't let this go. The days that followed blurred together. The Denver startup I worked for was in a crunch phase, deadlines looming, clients breathing down our necks, and I buried myself in code, in meetings, in debugging sessions that stretched into the early hours of the morning. I didn't talk about Boulder. I didn't talk about my family. But every evening, as I returned to my apartment, I found myself checking my phone the second I stepped inside, waiting for a message from Samantha, waiting for a call from Derek. Samantha called every day. Her voice wore thinner each time. "Eric's still critical," she said, trying to hold it together, but I could hear the tears just beneath the surface. "The doctors say his liver's badly damaged. They don't know if," she choked back the rest. "And Travis, he still hasn't woken up, Matthew. I don't know what to do. I'll come by tomorrow," I told her every time. "You won't be alone." And I did. Almost every day. I drove back and forth between Denver and Boulder, the roads familiar now, mechanical. I brought her coffee, sandwiches, sometimes just a quiet place to cry. In Eric's room, I sat by his bed, holding his small hand, telling him stories about the old camping trips Travis and I used to take, the time we tried to build a treehouse and ended up falling in a creek, or how Travis once caught a fish with a shoelace and a paperclip. He didn't respond. His eyes didn't flicker, but I kept talking. I had to believe he could hear me. Travis was in the next room, surrounded by machines, monitors blinking like tired sentinels. Seeing him like that, my brother, the one who always kept moving, kept smiling, kept fighting, now still and pale, crushed me. Samantha sat between the rooms most days, dividing herself between her husband and her son. Her face was gaunt, her voice raw. "Thank you for coming, Matthew," she said one evening, barely audible. "I don't know how I'd get through this without you." "You're never alone," I told her, even as I felt like I was crumbling inside. I wanted to do more. I wanted to fix it. But all I could do was wait, for Derek, for the truth, for justice. I avoided my father. He called a few times, leaving voicemails, calm, rehearsed, as if nothing had happened. "Matthew, are you okay? Your mother's asking about you." I never called back. I couldn't talk to him. Not now. Not when I had that image of Eric in the hospital bed burned into my memory. Not when I knew what my father might have done. Every time I saw Eric's small body under those sheets, tubes running into his arms, anger flared in me like wildfire. I wanted to march into my father's office and demand the truth. Scream it out of him. But I knew it would be useless. He'd never break. He never had. 3 weeks passed like that. Grief, rage, helplessness. And then Derek called. "Matt," he said, his voice low, serious. But there was something else there, something like momentum. "We've gone through the documents you sent." I sat down, already bracing myself. "This is heavy stuff," Derek continued. "Bribes, tax evasion, internal communications that prove your father's company covered up that mining death." I swallowed hard. "So what happens now?" "We've opened a formal investigation," he said. "The FBI is stepping in." Relief and dread crashed into me at once. I gripped the phone tighter. "What about the cake?" I asked. My voice was hoarse, dry. Derek paused. "We're tracing the order," he said. The bakery invoice led to a dummy account, but some of the payment transactions linked back to a shell company, a subsidiary of Grant Minerals. He took a breath. "We don't have direct evidence tying your father to the poison yet, but we're digging deeper." It's only a matter of time. I sat there, stunned. You did the right thing sending this to me, Matt, he added. Thanks, Derek, I said softly. But as I hung up, I stared at the wall in front of me, my thoughts spiraling. Justice was coming. The machine my father built was starting to crack. But at what cost? My mother, frail and dying, might never survive the fallout. And if Travis didn't wake up, if Eric didn't make it, would justice ever be enough to ease the pain? Over the following weeks, I heard about my father through the news and through Derek. The federal prosecutor's office announced a major investigation into Grant Minerals, with allegations of bribing local officials and large-scale tax evasion. My father's name was splashed across every headline next to words like corruption and scandal. Their stock crashed. The empire he'd spent his life building was starting to crumble. Once, I even saw him on TV, standing in front of the company's headquarters, a wall of microphones in his face. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, hollow cheeks, heavy lines under his eyes, but still defiant. I'm innocent, he told the press, voice steady, chin high. This is a witch hunt. I didn't believe him. Not anymore. Then one evening, my phone rang. My mother. Her voice was so thin I could barely hear her over the static. Matthew, what's happening with your father? She asked. The news. They're saying terrible things. What do you know? I froze, my throat tightening. I didn't want to lie, but I couldn't bear to break her heart completely. Mom, I'm not sure, I said, choosing every word like a landmine. I'm trying to do the right thing. She went quiet for a long moment, and I thought the call had dropped. But then she whispered, so fragile it nearly shattered me. I just want our family to be at peace. Those words sliced right through me. I wanted to promise her everything would be okay, but I couldn't. Not with Travis and Eric still fighting for their lives, and my father tangled up in crimes that were finally coming to light. 2 months passed. It felt like a lifetime. Derek called again, urgency in his voice. Matt, we've got more evidence, he told me. Internal emails from your father's company. They link a former assistant of his to ordering the cake. My pulse roared in my ears. Do you have proof it was my father? I asked. Derek sighed. There's no direct evidence tying him personally to the order, but the assistant says he was following instructions from the top. We're building the case, Matt. We'll get there. I let out a breath I didn't even know I was holding. Thanks, I said, my voice rough. Keep going. After hanging up, I just slumped in my chair, staring out the window. The Rocky Mountains stood there in the evening haze, but they didn't look majestic anymore. They looked distant, muted, like a painting someone had left out in the rain. I had done the right thing. I knew that. I had to know that. But the cost of exposing the truth was becoming clearer every day. Travis and Eric were still in the hospital. My mother was growing weaker, her voice fainter every time she called. And my father, the man I had once worshipped, was facing the crushing weight of the law. I didn't know if I had the strength to see this all the way through, but there was no turning back. The weeks that followed blurred together, long days at the startup, writing code, leading client calls, pretending to be okay. But my mind was always at the hospital. Every time I stepped into that sterile hallway, I saw Samantha, sitting between 2 rooms, Eric's and Travis's, her eyes red, her face gaunt. It was like watching a candle burn itself to nothing. Then, finally, a small mercy. A few weeks later, Eric started showing signs of recovery. The doctors said he'd passed the critical stage, but the damage to his liver was permanent. He would need a strict diet, medication, constant monitoring for the rest of his life. I held his tiny hand, the same one that once smeared chocolate frosting across my birthday table, and felt the weight of it all slam into my chest. If I hadn't handed him that cake. If I hadn't. I swallowed hard, pushing the guilt down. But Travis, he wasn't so lucky. One morning, just as I was sipping coffee in my apartment, my phone rang. It was Samantha. Her voice was broken, ragged, like something inside her had cracked wide open. Matthew. She choked out between sobs. Travis is gone. My heart stopped. Last night, she managed to say, the doctors, they said he wouldn't make it. His liver, it stopped functioning. It felt like the floor collapsed beneath me. I don't remember what I said to Samantha, only that I mumbled some hollow words of comfort, words that sounded like they belonged to someone else. Then I hung up. I sat there, alone in my apartment, staring at the wall as silence wrapped around me like chains. Travis, my brother, the one who always teased me about taking life too seriously, the one who tried, in his own way, to understand me, was gone. Just like that. No goodbye, no warning. Gone. The grief didn't crash over me like a wave. It sank into me, cold and slow. I didn't cry, not because I was strong, but because the pain was so vast, so heavy, it left me numb. I drove to the hospital in a fog. When I arrived, Samantha was in the hallway, sitting on a plastic chair as if her body no longer knew how to stand. Her hands trembled in her lap. When she saw me, She broke down. I held her, her sobs shaking us both. I don't know what to do, Matthew. She kept whispering into my chest. I don't know what to do. I didn't have an answer. We held a small funeral for Travis a few days later, at a quiet home not far from where he used to live. My mother came, wheeled in by a nurse, her body frail and sunken like paper folded too many times. Her eyes were red, but no more tears came. She had cried all she could. My father didn't attend. He was under house arrest, waiting for his hearing. His absence didn't surprise me, but it still made the emptiness in the room feel heavier. Samantha stood with Eric, holding his tiny hand. He looked so small in his black suit, his tie askew, his shoes a little too big. He didn't really understand. Not fully. When we stood at the casket, I stared at the polished wood and thought about the last time Travis and I laughed together. I thought about the way he used to nudge me with his elbow when I got too serious. The way he joked that I'd end up a recluse with 1,000 books and no one to share them with. And now he was gone. I kept thinking, what if I had never invited them? What if I hadn't accepted that cake? What if I had taken the risk myself? I tried to suppress the guilt, but it clung to every breath. Meanwhile, Derek kept pushing forward. A few days after the funeral, he called again. His tone was more resolute than ever. Matt, we have enough evidence to charge your father, he said. I closed my eyes, listening. Bribery, tax evasion, the cover-up of the fatal mining accident. It's all verified. The FBI raided Grant Minerals and found backup documentation that matched what you sent us. I didn't say anything. I just waited. As for the cake, Derek paused. We don't have direct evidence linking your father to the poison yet, but the person who ordered it, a former assistant of his, says he was following instructions from the top. We're building the case to bring him to trial. Thanks, I murmured, my voice flat. Do what you have to do. Under federal law, Derek explained, the charges against my father were serious, bribing federal officials, large-scale tax fraud, and concealing a fatal workplace accident. Each one carried a potential sentence of up to 7 years, not to mention fines in the millions. If they prove the cover-up directly led to harm, especially now, with Travis dead and Eric injured, my father could face even more time. Grant Minerals, the monument to his ambition, was collapsing. Their stock was in freefall. 80% of its value gone in weeks. Contractors were cutting ties. Government agencies were distancing themselves. The press swarmed the story, labeling it one of the most egregious corporate scandals in recent Colorado history. One headline in the Denver Post stopped me cold. Grant Minerals, an empire built on blood and corruption. I read it in silence, the words sinking in. My father had lost everything, his empire, his power, and his freedom. But Travis was still dead. Eric still faced a lifetime of medication and doctor visits. And my mother, she was still slipping away. One afternoon, a few days after the funeral, I visited her. She lay in bed, her skin pale and papery, her eyes sunk deep but still faintly lit by something. Maybe love, maybe pain, maybe both. She looked at me and smiled faintly. Matthew, she whispered, reaching out her trembling hand. I took it gently. I know what you did, she said. Those documents, you gave them to the police, didn't you? I lowered my gaze. I had to, Mom. I couldn't let it go on. She didn't speak at first. Then she squeezed my hand, surprisingly strong for someone so weak. I don't blame you, she whispered. But I wish our family didn't have to be like this. Her words were a knife. I wanted to say I was sorry. I wanted to explain that I had no choice. But nothing I could say would take back the cost of the truth. So I just sat there beside her, holding her hand, listening to the faint rattle of her breath. And I feared that the truth, the justice I fought for, would be the final blow to push her away. A month later, my father went to trial. I didn't go. I couldn't stand the thought of seeing him sitting there in the defendant's chair, dressed in a suit that once commanded respect, now just cloth draping a man whose empire had crumbled. I didn't want to hear his excuses, his attempts to justify what he'd done, or worse, watch him pretend he was a victim. Derek called me afterward. His voice was steady but tired, carrying the weight of months of legal battles. Matthew, he said, it's over. I sat on the couch, clutching the phone so tightly. What happened? He stayed calm. Derek told me, but his eyes were different this time. No arrogance, just defeated. I closed my eyes, letting the words settle. He was sentenced, Derek went on. 12 years in federal prison for bribery and tax evasion. Another 3 for covering up the mining accident. I took a slow breath, trying to process it. What about the poisoning? I asked. Derek sighed. Not enough evidence yet. His former assistant still won't talk beyond vague instructions, and the money trail is thin. But the case is open. We'll keep digging. A silence fell between us, and for a second I almost felt sorry for my father, almost. But then I remembered Travis. I remembered Eric lying in a hospital bed, I remembered my mother, so fragile she could barely lift her hand, asking me why our family had to fall apart. Thanks, Derek, I finally said, my voice hoarse. For everything. Take care of yourself, Matt. He replied before hanging up. Grant Minerals officially declared bankruptcy not long after the sentencing. The name was plastered across every local news station. Grant Minerals collapses. Federal agents seize assets to pay debts. The mines closed. The employees were laid off. The heavy equipment that had once rumbled through the mountains was silenced forever. I read the headlines and felt an emptiness I hadn't expected. That company had once been tied to my identity, to my family's name. Even if I'd left it behind years ago, some part of me still carried the echoes of it. Now it was nothing more than scorched earth, the ashes of my father's ambition. I couldn't stay in Denver. Every block, every street corner reminded me of what I'd lost, reminded me of who I used to be, and what I could never be again. So I left. I packed up the apartment, stacked the few possessions that mattered, and drove west until the mountains gave way to the Pacific. A small town in Oregon called Atoria became my refuge. It wasn't glamorous, but it was quiet, perched on a bluff where I could watch fishing boats slip across the gray-blue waves. My new apartment was plain, a second-floor unit with squeaky floors and a sea view through windows streaked with salt. But it was mine, and it was far enough away from everything that had happened. I took a job at a renewable energy startup, helping develop software for offshore wind turbines. The work was steady, honest, and it kept my mind busy. The people there were good, unassuming folks, the kind who didn't pry, who let me be. They called me Matt, just another engineer with a quiet nature and a taste for black coffee. I liked it that way. But every evening, when I came home and shut the door, the quiet returned like a phantom. I had a photo on my new desk, Travis holding up a trout he'd caught, grinning ear to ear, with Eric sitting on his shoulders, wielding a stick like a sword. Whenever I looked at that picture, my chest tightened so hard it hurt to breathe. Travis was gone, and Eric, though he had survived, would never have a normal life. Every week, I called Samantha to check on him. He's okay, she would tell me, though I could hear the cracks in her voice. He keeps asking about his dad, though. I don't know what to say, Matthew. I try to answer, but the words felt useless. I sent money whenever I could, even though she insisted. You've done enough, Matthew, she'd say. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. I was the one who'd passed that cake across the table. I was the one who had drawn Travis and Eric into the crossfire between me and my father. I never told Samantha how heavy that guilt weighed on me, but I knew she could see it in my eyes whenever we spoke. And my mother, she never recovered. After Travis's funeral, she seemed to fade, as though all the light had drained from her. She passed away quietly, in her sleep, a few weeks later. When they called me, I didn't feel shock, just an aching numbness. It was as if she had finally grown too tired to keep fighting for a family already broken beyond repair. I returned to Boulder for her funeral, standing in front of her coffin, feeling as if the last fragile piece of my family had been laid to rest. My father wasn't allowed to attend. He was serving his sentence in a federal prison in Colorado. I never visited. I didn't send letters. I didn't ask about his condition. I didn't even know if he was informed of my mother's death, and I didn't care. He'd made his choices. He'd carved out a path of power and control, paved with silence and betrayal, and that path had destroyed everything it once promised to protect. Before leaving Boulder for what I knew would be the last time, I drove to the old family home. The driveway was empty. The windows, once glowing with warm light and noise, were now dark and blank. A small sign in the front yard read for sale. I stood outside the house for a long time before walking in. The door creaked the same way it always had, but the life inside was gone. The furniture was cleared, the curtains removed. Walls once covered with photos and framed memories were now bare and echoing. I stepped into the living room and just stood there. The sun filtered through the dusty window panes and lit the space where my mother's recliner used to be, the same spot where she'd once reached out and held my hand, her voice trembling as she begged me not to let this family fall apart. That day felt like another lifetime now. I wandered through the house in silence, stopping in each room like I was walking through a museum of ghosts. In the upstairs hallway closet, behind an old sewing basket and a cracked photo album, I found a small box. Inside were letters, faded envelopes labeled in my mother's handwriting. Some were addressed to Travis, others to me. Letters she'd written when we were kids and never sent. Maybe because she thought there would always be time. My fingers trembled as I opened one addressed to me. The paper was worn, her script uneven. Matthew, my boy, you're stronger than you know. Don't let pain define you. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and tucked it into my pocket. I closed the box, left it in the closet, and walked down the stairs. I didn't look back when I locked the door. Back in Atoria, I lived quietly. I kept my head down. I worked. I walked the beaches. The sea helped. Something about the wind and salt and the rhythmic crash of the waves offered a kind of numb healing that the mountains in Colorado never could. I no longer hated my father. That fire had cooled. What remained was a deep sadness. Warren Grant, once a giant in my eyes, was now just a man. A man sitting in a prison cell, aging fast, serving a 12-year sentence for crimes committed in the name of ambition. With his health already on the decline, I doubted he'd live long enough to walk free again. The press had stopped talking about him. Grant Minerals was just a headline from last quarter, a cautionary tale in business textbooks. But I couldn't forget, not because I wanted vengeance, but because the truth came at a cost. I used to believe the truth would set me free, that exposing what my father had done would bring clarity, closure, justice. But justice, I realized, doesn't always come with peace. It just puts things where they belong. No more illusions. No more pretending. I wrote a letter to my mother one night, not to send, just to write. In it, I told her everything. And I ended it by saying, sometimes the cost of truth is a loss that can't be undone. That's when I started keeping a journal. Not to document the scandal, not to retell the story, but to understand myself. Each page became a place for the pain I couldn't say out loud. My thoughts about Travis, about Eric, about Mom, even about Dad. I wrote down what I wished I'd learned sooner. One entry read, ambition, when left unchecked, doesn't just consume the person chasing it. It devours everything and everyone in its path. That was my father's legacy. But the biggest lesson? That was about forgiveness. Not for my father. For myself. I had carried guilt like a second skin. For leaving the company. For ignoring signs. For handing that cake to Eric. For not seeing it all coming. But I came to understand, I couldn't control everything. I could only do what was right. Even when it hurt. And if there's anything I could say to someone, anyone, reading this story, it would be this. Cherish your family. But don't let loyalty blind you from what's right. The truth might tear your world apart, but silence is crueler. And above all, live a life you won't regret when you look back. I'm still learning how to do that. One morning, I stood on the Atoria shore, the cold ocean wind brushing past me as waves pounded the rocks below. I pulled out my mother's letter. Read the last lines again. Don't let pain define you. I folded it gently and slid it back into my pocket, letting the sea breeze ruffle my hair and sting my eyes. I didn't know if I'd ever find complete peace, but I knew I was trying. And maybe that was all I could do. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.